In the previous section, we have seen how radicalization processes might unfold under laboratory conditions, so to say. As I already said, this process in the vast majority of cases is accompanied by a series of indicators and symptoms that allow us to identify further information, which is essential when thinking about how to deal with such cases. Indicators can provide us with 3 pieces of information basically. First, we can find out if the individual is in fact going through a process of radicalization or psychosocial crisis. We can find out at which stage of this process he or she currently stands according to the radicalization model outlined in the previous chapter. And third, we can find out if this process involves any kind of violent tendencies and hence could pose a threat to others. We group those indicators around different categories and distinguish fundamentally between indicators that can be observed, which we call crisis symptoms, and those indicators that are rather not observable but can be found out through further inquiries. With regard to indicators that are rather hard to observe, individual and social strain factors. Individual vulnerabilities are, for instance, identity crisis in adolescence, feeling dissonances inside, psychological disorders, or any kind of personality factors. Social strain factors are, for instance, negative life events and mechanisms of social exclusion, difficult family situations, social relationships beyond the family, and also situations of marginalization, inequality, lack of education, discrimination, denial of rights, or persecution. Crisis symptoms, which are defined as those indicators that can be observed by outsiders, are subdivided into those that hint at a general process of radicalization and those that suggest violence plays a vital role in this process. So the crisis symptoms outlined in the yellow kinds of signs and behaviors that can clearly indicate a radicalization process in general. Typical patterns of reasoning as used by Salafi movements, disrespectful treatment of authorities and problems in school, proselytization activities and harassment, risk behaviors, sudden or striking changes in behavior and appearance, autoaggressive behavior, or social withdrawal are all observations that can amount to crisis symptoms. The serious crisis symptoms outlined in the red box cover all kinds of signs and behaviors that indicate a radical process is on the brink of turning violent or has turned violent already. We also call these indicators red flags, as immediate action is needed if someone gets across any of the signs and behaviors listed under this category. Legitimating and idealizing violence, threatening dissenters, death rhetoric, suicidal tendencies, fascination for martyrdom, obsessive fascination for other perpetrators of violence, extremist group membership, access to lethal weapons, an increased interest in or procurement of weapons, as well as direct or indirect warning of committing an act of violence, for instance, through leakage behavior, are all observations that amount to serious crisis symptoms associated with violent tendencies. Leakage behavior refers to any form of communication by which individuals let shine through to a third party, such as peers, a social media audience, educational, health professionals, or any other person they intend to commit a violent crime. It is important to repeat here that any of the signs and behaviors classified as serious crisis symptoms mark all red flags. They have to be taken with utmost seriousness and require immediate action. And at the same time, it is also important to recall that observing a single indicator or even several of them does not necessarily mean a student is trapped in the process of radicalization. So it is important that you always try to contextualize as much as you can what you see and hear. Or in other words, talk to your colleagues, try to find out more about the social network of the student in question, and most importantly, try to maintain constant communication with the student and stay in touch. As we have already seen in the process model in the previous section, all of the aforementioned indicators can also be aligned with the different phases of a radicalization process. So on the next couple of slides, you'll find a number of concrete examples as to how the indicators might show up in real life. Please read the information carefully and think about if you've already got across about any of the examples. Now please watch the following conference presentation by Peter R. Neumann on online radicalization processes and an analysis of how international terrorist groups such as ISIS take advantage of social media and the internet for their own purposes. Think about the following questions. What are extremist group strategies to use social media and the internet? And how can educational institutions contribute to counter the specific contents and narratives extremist groups seek to transport via social media and the internet? Now that we have learned lots of details about circumstantial factors that usually fuel radicalization processes and might rather have a negative impact on an individual's psychosocial crisis, it is also important to look at the resources that might help prevent an individual's tracked into radicalization processes or psychosocial crisis, or at least interrupt such processes in case they are already underway. This is also important for prevention work in general, as those resources can contribute considerably to the success of preventative interventions or supporting measures for individuals trapped in radicalization or psychosocial crisis, or increase at least their effectiveness. As a consequence, such aspects should always be taken into account when drawing up interventions or even be integrated into such activities. In the following section, we have sorted out a range of resources or protection factors that can help to interrupt radicalization processes and/or psychosocial crisis. Please observe them carefully and reflect on how they might be integrated into prevention or early intervention measures, and which kinds of measures are particularly suitable to make use of them.